So I just listened to the first fourth of your audio clip, and I think that there's already a conflation, or there's a different usage of terms that I think needs clarification. You repeatedly said that you and me agree that there's no such thing as strong emergence, and then you said that you don't like the distinction between strong and weak. But then you said that you don't believe that we can explain phenomena in terms of their parts. So here's my problem. Explaining things in terms of their parts is called weak emergence. The inability to explain things in terms of their parts is called strong emergence. So to me, it seems like what you're saying is, I don't believe in strong emergence, and I also believe in strong emergence. And so that's why I think the distinction is useful, because people conflate all over the place when they're talking about emergence. They'll say, oh, I believe weak emergence, but then they describe strong emergence. Or they say strong emergence, and then they describe weak emergence. So because people are not clear about these distinctions, they flip-flop back and forth. So we have to be clear, can things be explained in terms of their parts, or can they not? That is the weak-strong distinction. My stance is that every single phenomenon can be explained in terms of its parts. Everything is weakly emergent, which is simultaneously the same thing as saying everything is reducible. Those two things are logically equivalent. And there is nothing that cannot be explained in terms of its parts. And that's why I reject strong emergence. So the second half of this audio clip, I think I agree with most of it, as long as we're talking about weak emergence. Like, I think that consciousness is definitely weakly emergent. I think that all of the layers of science, as you sometimes put it, they weakly emerge from each other in a hierarchy. Whereas like physics emerges into chemistry, chemistry emerges into biology, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm on board with all of that. I'm just not on board with the idea that they can't be explained in terms of their lower levels. Some people like to say liquidity is an emergent phenomenon, because if you look at the atoms, they're not liquid. But I think this is just, people don't know what they're talking about. It's like, what is liquid? Well, H2O, it's the electronegativity of the oxygen is higher than the electronegativity of the hydrogen, which results in a tripolar framework where the oxygen steals electrons from the hydrogen. What that does is the structure of the H2O, it becomes a magnet, or it becomes polar. It's negative on the oxygen side and it's positive on the hydrogen side. Well, what happens when you have magnets? They are attracted to each other, but they're not strongly attracted to each other. They're weakly attracted to each other. And so H2O, because of its electronic structure being polar, when multiple H2Os are next to each other, they are naturally attracted to each other because they're all magnets. And so all of these magnets are attracted to each other, but they're weakly attracted to each other, so they kind of slosh back and forth, kind of attracted, kind of separating. And so the weak attraction dynamic is the same thing as liquidity. The weak attraction dynamic at the atomic layer is the liquidity. So you can completely explain liquid at the fundamental level. So that's like an example of weak emergence. You can explain it at the reducible level, at the fundamental level, and there's nothing in excess of the fundamental level. Now, there's useful things about thinking at the emergent level, but there's nothing in excess of the fundamental level. I don't know. I use these examples a lot, so apologies if you already read these explanations in other comments. But yeah, someone in the comments was saying software is emergent, and the same thing. He was saying it's absurd to explain software at the fundamental level, but I don't think it is, because ones and zeros, that's a state, right? There's a state of a zero or a state of a one, and atoms can have states where it's does the atom have an electron? That's the one state, and if it lacks an electron, that's the zero state. And you can scale that up. Like you can have lots of atomic substrates, and then you can test for states on any substrate. So any type, silicon, carbon, like any substrate you want, you can test it for a state. And if you've got two states, guess what? You've got a binary, computational paradigm. So yeah, you can fully explain software at the fundamental level. And again, yeah, it can be very useful to think at the emergent level, because when you're writing software, nobody wants to write ones and zeros. They want to write in human language. So they're augmenting software at the, emergent level, specifically at the, language, the computer software language level that humans can understand. Yeah, so it's useful to operate at the emergent level because it's more like a shortcut. That's probably the best way to think about it. It's like there's the complex way to understand it, which is reduction, and then there's the simple way to understand it, which is the emergent layer. So every phenomenon, or every weakly emergent phenomenon, would have two avenues of explanation, right? And so because the emergent level is easier to process, understand, and figure things out at, we prefer to operate to use our brains to operate at the emergent level. But the problem is the emergent level is basically imaginary. It's all subjective. It's all our human perspective. So like Newtonian gravity is probably a pretty good example. Like we kind of looked out and subjectively viewed the heavens, and we kind of like did these subjective measurements, and we tried to, map the movement of the planets. And we built a simple paradigm that was easy for our brains to understand. And, we can map the phenomenon of gravity pretty good at this emergent level. But gravity does not operate at that level. It's more of a heuristic than an accurate calculation, because, gravity is actually a fundamental thing, not a... So the emergent laws of gravity are actually inaccurate mathematics to describe the truth, which is the fundamental gravity. So you're saying something to the effect of, with emergence, new functions, capabilities come online. And that's one of the core things that we're disagreeing about here. Because I would call that strong emergence, especially in the context of you can't explain the new ability in terms of its parts. So, for example, I mean, things like a bird flying, or a human eating, or a human breathing, like, it seems like, ooh, there's a new functionality, but it's all explainable in terms of the parts. So, like, maybe from a evolutionary perspective, it's like, first they were rodents, now they're birds. It's like a new capability came online. They can fly, okay, but like nothing in the laws of physics changed. The shape of their materials changed. And, pressure dynamics, right, in the air, like atoms bump into each other and it creates pressure. So pressure dynamics is a fundamental aspect of reality. Pressure dynamics have been acting on these materials the whole time, but once you form the materials into the shape of a wing, now the wing, it's applying the pressure dynamics such that they move against the pressure dynamic, which we interpret as flight. So the flight is just a subjective name that we invent. We say, hey, look, we're going to call that flight. But, the laws of physics, there's no law of flight. It's just pressure dynamics. So flight is equivalent to atoms interacting with pressure dynamics, right? So for me, it seems like just like the reductionist methodology is to explain things in terms of the parts. And I think the thing is that it's really complex. Like you have to understand chemistry. You have to understand all fundamental laws of physics. You have to understand how the laws of physics scale up. Like, it's a complex project to reduce things. And I think people don't know how to reduce things usually. And so they just assume that they can't be reduced. And just, yeah, to me, that's just a fallacy. Just not understanding how to reduce something is not evidence that it can't be reduced. And so, yeah, I think that the strong emergence perspective is just that. It's saying, oh, we don't know how to go from A to B, and therefore there is no A to B. It's just A pops out B. That's a logical problem. There has to be a logical connection between the fundamentals and the emergent. So, like one example of something that we think of as emergent, but it's pretty obviously just, a reductive phenomenon, is something like a hurricane, right? A hurricane is just atoms moving around. Like, it's the emergent behavior is maybe useful for plotting trajectories, right? So subjectively, like in reality, it's a bunch of atoms moving around. There's pressure dynamics, there's heat rising. So in the central column of the hurricane, hot air is rising, and it creates a suction effect because of the natural attributes of atoms. The natural attributes of atoms are they move around, and if there's empty space, they will statistically move into the empty space because there's no resistance. So the atoms follow the path of least resistance to enter the place that has been abandoned by the hot air that's rising. And because the Earth is spinning, it creates a context where the materials that are being sucked into the center of the hurricane are rotating. And so that creates atoms that are rotating around a central column of rising air, hot air. And so that's all very reductive. That's all the parts. And that's, yeah, everything about the hurricane is being explained by the parts. But humans, we don't really interact with the world at the reductive layer. We interact at the objective layer. Like we see a cloud and we say, ooh, that is a storm, right? We don't say, oh, that's a bunch of atoms. We say, oh, that's a storm. And then we even give it a name. We subjectively apply names and titles. It's like, that's not only are we applying the subjective label of hurricane to those atoms, we're also applying the subjective label of Milton because we think that this hurricane has a personality and it's moving in a certain trajectory. So it's like an agent. And so it's Hurricane Milton. But that's my point, is all this emergent stuff, it's all subjective. It's all invented by humans as a way to obtain heuristics. Because perhaps if you want to understand the trajectory of the hurricane, understanding the atoms is going to be most accurate, but that's not feasible. So we try to measure the trajectory in different ways at the emergent level because it's easier. And so, yeah, there's all of this emergent stuff. It's actually inaccurate subjectivity, where the truth of the matter is at the reductive level. So when I say subjective, I mean ontologically subjective, not epistemically subjective. So epistemology is usually the domain most people are familiar with, the objective-subjective distinction. This is a whole linguistic paradigm that I have developed to declutter these words, but it requires a little bit of explanation. Let's see. The word objective and subjective, they come from the components objective and subjective, right? Objective, it means of or like an object. Subjective means of or like a subject. So we're saying objective means it has the vibe of an object. And when we say subjective, we're saying it has the vibe of a subject. That's the etymological root. That's the meta meaning of the term. Okay, but that's not very clear. What is the vibe of the subject? Okay, now we need to figure out what are the attributes of an object, what are the attributes of a subject, and we apply those to the linguistic domain that is relevant in the context of which we are speaking. So if we are talking about ontology, then we need to extract the relevant properties, the relevant attributes of an object or a subject, and then ontological objectivity is extracting the ontological attributes of an object Epistemic objectivity is extracting the epistemic attributes of an object and saying this thing has epistemic attributes of an object. So what does all of that mean? When we're talking ontology, we're talking about what exists. What is the substance? What is the stuff that exists? Ontological objectivity, if we have an object, if an object exists in ontology, we have something like an apple, and we put a microscope on the apple and we find atoms, and so it's material. So objects are material. So ontological objectivity is the materials. Ontological subjectivity, we'd be like, well, here's a subject. It's a mind. There's a human, and we like zoom into the mind, and in the mind there's consciousness, and so ontological subjectivity is consciousness. That's the material substrate for it's the substance. It's not consciousness is the substance of the subject. Epistemic objectivity is probably what you're more familiar with and what you were interpreting me as saying when I was not saying that. Epistemic subjectivity or epistemic objectivity, we're saying, okay, so here's a thing, and in epistemics, we're trying to figure out, do we know this thing? Yes, is it possible to know it? And so objects, when we're trying to know an object, like if there's an apple, we're going to apply epistemics to the apple. Is this a real apple or is this a hallucination? And so you have multiple sensory organs. You'd say, okay, well, my visual system says it's there. Well, is my visual system hallucinating? Let's test it against my touch system. Let's test it against my taste, my smell, my tactile sensations. Maybe listen to sounds echoing off of the apple. Like you try to verify it against your other senses to get a consensus of consistent measurements across independent lines of measurement. And then you would say, well, maybe one agent is not enough. Let's get multiple agents to test this. So, you get multiple people that are bouncing all of their tests off it. And so it's this system of third-party confirmation of multiple epistemic measurements. And so that's the normal type of objectivity we talk about when we say we're being able to verify that this is objectively valid, objectively true. It's true independent of any one person, because it's able to be verified across multiple dimensions. What is epistemically subjective? When someone says, I'm in pain, and the doctor says, what level of pain? 1 out of 10. And then the person says, I'm at a pain level of 6, right? Does the doctor know what pain level they're at? No, the doctor has no idea, because 6 is completely meaningless. This is an epistemically subjective fact. The pain is real. It's 1000% real. It's 1000% true. But we don't have objective epistemics. We can't verify their level of pain. It's because it's trapped in their subjectivity, and we don't have tests to get inside their subjectivity. And so epistemically subjective means that it's only verifiable to the subject. It's not verifiable in that objective way. So I am definitely a reductionist. I think that's the correct take on these situations. So yeah, I embrace the title reductionist. Now, one thing, it seems like you keep repeating this idea, but I feel like I've already stated my stance is opposite multiple times. You keep alluding to the idea that I want to talk about everything at the lowest level, and I've repeatedly said, no, it can be useful to talk about things at the emergent level. So I'm not saying that we should never talk about things at the emergent level, but I am saying that it's more accurate to talk at the fundamental level. So your example of the movie is really interesting, because I think you're wisely, astutely pointing out that like the ones and zeros of the movie are maybe ridiculous to talk about in context of what's going on with the movie. But I think that's just because the movie involves more materials than just the movie itself. The movie is interacting with human brains, and so the human brain is composed of atoms. And so if we're understanding how these human brains are processing a movie, we actually need to understand the the reductive aspects of the brain, not just the movie itself. So the reductive aspects of the movie are interacting with the reductive aspects of the brain. And to understand how people are processing a movie, we have to understand both sets of reduction. And I think reduction would more accurately explain this process of, how movies are processed. Because, there's things like subliminal messaging. In a movie, there could be like one frame of something happening in the background, and it's subliminal. People are not even conscious of it, but those are photons, and those photons, they trigger your brain, and it triggers your amygdala because, ooh, there's a dark shadow. You didn't even notice the dark shadow, but, the amygdala is triggered by this chain of darkness that's being perceived, and now you're getting scared, and your physiology, your heart rate is increasing. All of this data is processed unconsciously, your body is reacting to it unconsciously, and an emergent explanation would be completely unable to explain it because it didn't even notice this frame of data, but the reductive level caught it. So one thing to keep in mind is that in my reductionist paradigm, uh, all emergent phenomena must be explainable by their parts, and maybe must be completely explainable by their parts, and all the parts that are relevant. Um, but that doesn't make a statement about the parts, right? So one thing that you seems like you are interpreting me as saying is that I want to reduce everything to just atoms or just material, and the clarification I want to make is that I am not ontologically committed to only one substance. So for the materialist paradigm, you would say reality is only materials, right? And so then the reductionist paradigm would say consciousness doesn't exist because consciousness is not material and only materials exist. So it's consciousness is an illusion, right? That would be the extreme materialist reductionist perspective on consciousness. I don't do that though, because I don't think that there's any reason to say atoms are the only substance in the universe, right? Atoms are not the only substance in the universe. There's photons, there's energy, there's gravity, there's a lot of other things other than just atoms, right? So to the extent that there are other substances, then there could be other emergent phenomena, and those other emergent phenomena would be reducible to a different substance, right? So, right, so some complex phenomenon of light would be reducible to photons. Some complex phenomenon of atoms would be reducible to atoms, and maybe there's a combined reductionism where there's a light atom phenomena that reduces to both light and atoms. So you'd include all of the parts. There's parts of it are photons, parts of it are atoms, and so this combined ontology is reducible to a combined to two substances. That being said, my paradigm for consciousness actually posits that there is an additional substance for consciousness, a qualia substance. And so ontologically subjective feelings like pain and pleasure would reduce to units of pain and pleasure in the qualia substance. And that is how ontologically subjective things can be reducible and explainable by their parts. A level 6 of pain reduces to, 6,000 micro units of qualia pain, kind of a thing. Okay, I just listened to your first 5-minute video clip, and I thought it was excellent. You did a very good job steel manning / analyzing my position. I found myself just agreeing with you the whole way through. Yes, and I really appreciate how you analyze these ideas so well, analyzing them from my perspective. So that was really impressive. So yeah, the ontological subjectivity, we don't have good tests for that. That's why consciousness is so elusive. The other thing, induction, I think it's fair to classify some of my approach to it as inductive. So yeah. And your point about science trumping induction, I 1000% agree. And I extremely value science and the scientific evidence, and I view the scientific evidence as the constraints for theories of consciousness. Any theory of consciousness, it must explain all of the evidence. So all of the accumulated scientific perspectives, they must be addressed. but I mean, how do you say, like, yeah, it's like the personal firsthand experience with consciousness. That's also part of the evidence that has to be addressed. So I agree with that. And then you went on. Oh, you were just saying, you were asking about my stance, how I would classify my stance on consciousness. Yes, I'm not an idealist for sure. I'm very. I feel like idealism is the least logical of the stances. I am not a panpsychist because I believe panpsychism has what I call the off problem of consciousness. OFF, off. So under panpsychism, everything would be on in terms of consciousness. And when we introspect within our own bodies as a test subject, we can feel different gradations of consciousness within our own self. You can feel that your eyes and ears and skin are hyperconscious or just very on. You can feel that your heart and lungs are medium on, or they have a low degree of consciousness as opposed to high. And then you can feel that your hair and your fingernails are basically off. There's zero consciousness. And none of that gradation makes any sense under panpsychism. Panpsychism is just the idea that everything is conscious. It's a binary. It's 0 or 1. Everything is 1. There's no spectrum. There's no, how do you explain sleep? Everything in your brain is moving very rapidly. How do you explain sleep, right? Sleep, that's a part of the evidence that we have to deal with for a theory of consciousness. Panpsychism just posits everything is on. That's too simple. And the simple answers are not going to explain the complex data. So conversely, with emergentism, I feel like emergentism has the on problem of consciousness. The on problem is explaining the transition point between off and on. Why does, when you're asleep, you're off, and then suddenly when you wake up, you're on? Why that? Or in terms of so this is the strong emergence issue, right? The strong emergence issue is, where is the threshold where it just magically turns on? Okay, if you want to reject the strong emergence where it magically turns on, then you've got like the weak emergence on problem, which is, what are the fundamental ingredients that are, with it all along the way, right? So the weak emergence, the parts basically have the same thing that is being emerged. And so that's basically, that's almost panpsychism if you do the weak emergence approach, because you have to include conscious principles at the atomic layer. My energism approach, as I see it, it solves both, or it posits a solution to both the on and off problems of consciousness. The off problem, so energism, it posits that energy transforms into consciousness, and so that's your binary. So you can either have consciousness by, you activate a transformation, now you have it, that's the on, or you don't activate a transformation and you don't have it, that's the off. And then you can have a materialistic system that it can produce multiple units or lesser quantity of units, and that gives you your gradation. So the on problem is solved by transformation, the off problem is solved by transformation, and materialistic algorithms can choose when they want to turn it on, when they want to turn it off, etc. In terms of scientific evidence, I am married to the scientific evidence. So if there is conclusive evidence that energism is just wrong, then I will accept that, and I will have to go find a better theory that explains the evidence. But as far as I understand the science, there's a lot of holes in terms of how to explain consciousness, and so I haven't. I mean, there's different aspects of my theory that. So basically, I haven't found conclusive evidence that energism is wrong, and I have not found conclusive evidence that emergentism is correct, especially since, I mean, I haven't even seen a scientific distinction between weak and strong emergence, which I feel like if they're not even attempting to explain that, then they might not know how emergence works. So but I am very open to scientific evidence. So feel free to share if you think there's something relevant to share. All right, so it's easier to respond in smaller chunks, so I paused about a third of the way through the 10-minute video. You're talking about ontological subjectivity, and then you're contrasting it with like relativism and intersubjectivity. I think the problem here is that I'm talking at the reductive level. And I would say that intersubjectivity is a emergent, so a weakly emergent phenomena. And if you break intersubjectivity into its fundamental parts, its multiple subjectivities, so ontological subjectivity is the fundamental substance that builds intersubjectivity. I think that applies to relativism as well. So yeah, I'm just taking a reductive approach, basically saying intersubjectivity is made of subjectivity, so it is ontologically subjective. That's its substance. So yeah, I guess I'm looking at in ontological subjectivity as kind of a like a container for all of that stuff. I don't know how you feel about that. But yeah, the next point you said you referenced how we have these arbitrary names for electrons and like these kind of heuristical models for how they work. I mean, that's fine. Like, I'm not. Yeah, I don't conflate the two. When I talk about ontological objectivity, when I'm talking about the materials, I'm talking about the truth of the materials in and of themselves. I'm not talking about our map. I'm not talking about our models. I'm not talking about our subjectivity. I'm talking about the objectivity. So to the extent that I'm not saying that there are little, there's not an electron label floating around at the reductive level. I'm not including that in how I'm talking about electrons. So yeah, I accept the subjective objective distinction. I accept that the map is not the territory. I accept that math describes the fundamentals but is not the same as the fundamentals. I don't have an issue with any of that. Okay, so in terms of yes, I think ontological reductionist is probably an accurate way to describe my stance. Um, and in terms of accuracy, you were talking about how you cannot get values from the brain, in terms of understanding the brain. So I think that this is kind of what my theory of consciousness is addressing. This because in my ontological reductionist paradigm, all these emergent things, they must be explainable in terms of their parts. So if you love someone and you love them a lot, right? There's like the fact that you can say that there's a lot of love means that it's possible for there to be a little bit of love or no love. So there's a gradient. How do you get gradients? The only way to get a gradient is to add up some parts. Like you've got 0 parts, you got 1 part, you got 1,000 parts. And so during your life, you experience the 0 love. Then you go through a phase and you experience 1 love and you experience 2 love. And you go through these phases. You can introspect on your own qualitative experience and say, hey, I've felt all these gradations. And now this is a lot of love in comparison because I never had all these units of love before, right? So to me, the only way to make sense of consciousness is for there to be units of consciousness. And yeah, at the objective level of science, we have a really hard time detecting how this subjectivity is working. And that's why Emergence posits that there are energy transformations that are producing these units of consciousness. And so if you incorporate reductive consciousness into neuroscience, to the extent that it's true, right, it's hard to detect, to the extent that it's true that there are units of consciousness being produced in the brain, then then you could derive values from a I don't know if holistic is the right word, but if you could upgrade neuroscience to detect the subjective energy, right? Then you could find values, you could find color, you could find all this subjective stuff. You could detect it and you could measure it and you could, make predictive models on it. It's this subjective substance that is elusive. If we had access to it, we could build models of how consciousness is working in terms of these units. So yeah, I guess it's a limitation in science, not a limitation in theory, is kind of the stance I'm taking. Okay. So you mentioned how it seems like I'm dismissing subjectivity uh, as if it's not reliable or something like that. I think that's a conflation with epistemic subjectivity. But I don't know, so I don't know. I don't like so I'm a fan of subjectivity. So I know that the word subjective carries a lot of cultural baggage where people are, oh, that's just subjective, it's stupid and arbitrary. That's not how I feel about subjectivity in general. I view subjectivity as just a different lens. Okay. But in this context, when I say that emergent phenomena are subjective, um, what I mean to say is that we observe an objective phenomenon. We observe a hurricane. Now, that hurricane is a bunch of atoms. That is what it is. But we use our subjectivity to analyze that hurricane, and we try to model it with our subjectivity. So our consciousness is like a complex algorithm that mixes qualia into a algorithm. So we're using this algorithm to try to model the hurricane. We say, okay, so we're modeling it. There's kind of a structure here. There's no clear borders, right? The hurricane, it's amorphous, but we can kind of approximate a generic functional border. Okay, we're going to draw a circle. The circle does not objectively represent the hurricane, but for pragmatic purposes, we're modeling this thing. Subjectively, we draw a circle. And we say, okay, here's the hurricane, and we draw an arrow, and the hurricane is going this direction. There's no arrow in objective reality. These are just subjective. This is subjective modeling that we do to try to extract utility, right? We can get predictive utility out of these simplistic models. We got a circle, we got an arrow. Okay, everything in the circle gets hurt and gets destroyed and gets damaged. And the arrow is where the circle is going. So all of the stuff that follows that path is going to get hurt and destroyed. Okay, that's a very emergent description of the hurricane. And it's a very useful description of the hurricane. But the circles and the arrows, none of that represents the actual hurricane, right? And so that's kind of everything that when we're talking about emergence, like pick whatever you want to talk about, like it's basically at that level. We're drawing circles and arrows, and that's our emergent subjective understanding. And that's fine. It's useful. It's fine, but it's not a true explanation. It's not an accurate explanation. So I feel like you're reiterating your point about weak and strong emergence, that it's just a rhetorical strategy. I'm not aware of any rhetorical strategy. I'm not aware of how idealists weaponize this. So like I mentioned already, I feel like people often conflate between the two. So people will say, I'm an emergentist, and then half of the time they describe strong emergence, and then the other half of the time they describe weak emergence, and they're not even internally consistent about what they're talking about. So I feel like most people who talk about emergence don't understand the distinction because they flip-flop. And unfortunately, I feel like you've already flip-flopped, and I tried to point that out. I didn't see you address it. But you said you don't believe in strong emergence, but then you said, I don't believe emergent things can be explained in terms of their parts. That is that's a refutation of weak emergence, and that's an affirmation of strong emergence. The inability to explain things in terms of their parts, that is strong emergence. So you can't reject strong emergence and affirm it at the same time. So that's my issue. I hope for a little bit more clarity from you on how emergence works, because it can't be both ways. Okay, so I think you're making a really interesting point in this first audio clip here, kind of like a semantic point about, so you mentioned that under my definition, it's like weak emergence is the ability to explain things in terms of the parts. And then you go on to say that explanations require language, and language requires these semantic structures, these language games, and it's you're kind of alluding to this idea that there's multiple layers of language, and that you can't explain an emergent phenomenon in terms of reductive language,
because the reductive language is not rich enough to explain the emergent thing. I think I agree with you on this, right? So I think that that's perfectly fine and reasonable. I think the point of disagreement is that the definition of weak emergence that I gave you was a shortened, simplified version of the definition, where the true definition of weak emergence is closer to the effect of saying emergent phenomenon must be able to be explained by their parts in principle. So the in principle distinction is kind of crucial, and it subtracts the power of the semantic argument, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I can't explain this. I can't explain a hurricane at the layer of energy because we don't have a lot of words. Like our vocabulary for energy is really restricted. So I can't say very many useful things with this reductive language. But it's like, well, that's just because our language sucks. I have a very low opinion of language in general, a very low opinion of English. And so I think that language fails to capture most phenomenon accurately, and especially the layers of reality that we're less in tune with, that we have less grasp on, like the fundamentals are the most mysterious. So it makes sense that our language sucks at explaining the fundamentals the most. So the point being, our inability to explain things at the fundamental level is not because that they can't be explained by principles at the fundamental level. It's because our language sucks. So the principles, they all exist at the fundamental level. We have all the principles we need, and if we could design a better language, we could encapsulate all of those fundamental principles in better language, and then we would be able to explain the emergent things with this better language, because we can explain them in principle, right? That's the weak emergence perspective. So I guess I accept the fact that our semantics can make it hard to explain things, but I don't think that means we can't explain things in principle. Okay, to your second message, there's kind of 2 points here that I think we should split apart. So the love part, it seemed to me like you were describing like your experience with love, but it sounded like you were saying that when you were younger it was more intense, and now you're more mature and it's less intense. Like, I'm not judging what that means. Like maybe less intense means that's a really good type of love, and maybe more intense is a bad type of love. I'm not judging or implying anything by how to interpret that, but it seems like the fact that you yourself were able to say one was more intense, one was less intense, that seems like a qualitative difference that would require units in order to create such a gradient, right? Like, yeah, how do you get a differential of intensity without units, right? You know what I mean? Another thing about units, it's like our visual perspective, like it comes in the equivalent of pixels, right? Like you can measure the accuracy of vision in terms of pixels. You can create different levels of detail, and if the eye can't detect the distortions, then you've surpassed the pixel content of human vision. So like when you look out into the world, there are units of red, there are units of blue, like it's all differentiated, and it's not an infinite number of units of red, it's a finite number. Like there's a red box, there's a finite number of red color in that location. You know what I mean? It's like I don't think you can escape units. Like maybe they're not conventional units, but I feel like the nature of consciousness requires some type of unit system. How do you build vision without units? How do you build comparative values, comparable pain, comparable? How is anything comparable without units? Then you start talking about like a software paradigm. I think you were talking about two things here. You were talking about how there's no it doesn't make sense to say that there's an internet substance or a software substance. And I think I agree with that. But that's because we already know the substance. There is a substance behind software, and it's a material substance. And the way materials work is with movement, right? So materials are basically just movement substances. That's what atoms do. They jiggle, they move. The electrons, they find like something that they find a positive charge and they move towards it. The protons find a negative charge and they move towards it, and they stabilize when they've found an equilibrium. They are movement-based substrates, movement-based substances. So you might, like, it might be unintuitive. Why is software created by movement? But movement is all you need to get algorithms, right? You have to have states and you have to have movement. So you've got ones and zeros, and those move through a chain. And so you've got the ones and zeros. Those are the two states. Does it have an electron? Does it not have an electron? And then as it moves, you go from bit to bit, from material to material. You traverse these structures, and the electron is forking through these structures. It's lacking an electron over here. Okay, I'm going to go this way. Oh, it's lacking an electron over here. I'm going to go this way. And so the electron is moving. All of this movement, that's all you need to create algorithms. And once you have algorithms, you have software. So software is completely reducible to movement substances. But the key problem for consciousness is color is not the same thing as movement. Like, it doesn't make any sense to say color is the same thing as movement. Like, the electron moves over here, then it moves over here. Okay, what color is that? It's not a color, it's a movement. So the problem is, within software, there is no such thing as color. Like, I'm a software engineer, we can dissect software all day long. Nowhere inside the software is anything that is considered red qualia. Nothing like that exists anywhere in the software. Even a video game, even a movie, there's no such thing as color. In any movie, in any CD, it's all ones and zeros, right? Ones and zeros, that's just movement. That's not color. So if there's no color in the software, where does the color come from? So you have a monitor, right? Like computers, they've got the compute portion. The compute portion is the tower, you know what I mean? It's the engine of the computation, and you connect the computer to a monitor. So like the monitor is what creates the color. There's no color in the computer portion, the algorithm portion. The computations direct the electrons, they direct the electricity towards a photon emitter. A photon emitter is a bunch of material, and this material, it converts electricity into photons. So within the monitor, there is algorithmic movement. There's intelligent movement to point the electrons at a piece of material that converts movement into light. So there's no color, there's just movement all the way to the very end. At the very end, we convert movement into photon, but photons don't have color either. Photons are also movement materials. Each photon has a frequency, it's just a shape of movement. They move at a fast speed, and they're just vibrating at different frequencies. That's just movement. There's no color in photons. So even at the layer of the monitor, there's no color. The only time color enters the playing field is when the photon of movement interacts with our eyeball. And somehow, between our eye and our brain, the movement of the photon is converted to the sensation of color. And to me, there has to be a conversion process, because movement is not identical to color. Now maybe you could create a theory of consciousness where you say, I have the movement theory of consciousness, and according to my theory of consciousness, movement equals color. You could posit that's how the world works, but then you'd just be a panpsychist, because there's movement everywhere. So if movement is the same as color, every single atom is full of color. because every single atom is color because they are movement. So to me, there's a lot of problems with this this perspective of consciousness. I think you described my position pretty closely with the idea of every consciousness basically being off until life evolves. I mean, when you start to posit a theory that consciousness is, in a way, like there are possible transformations of consciousness at the fundamental layer of energy, it starts to make you more open-minded that, like, maybe stars, there's lots of energy in flux in a star. Like, maybe some of that energy is transforming into little sparks of consciousness, but it's probably not organized consciousness. And so I think the evolution of life creates the algorithms of materials, and the algorithms of materials, they organize the transformations of consciousness intelligently. So it's like, if a star has like, oh, there's a spark of red, there's a spark of orange, there's a spark of yellow, there's a spark of happiness, there's a spark of pain. It's like the star is just this chaotic spark of like random sensation, and it's not organized. It's not organized into a coherent narrative, not organized into a coherent self. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm open to, with my energism paradigm, I'm open to more possibilities for consciousness. Like, it's not just completely off, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just completely off, but in terms of intelligence, like the intelligent utilization of qualia, that's basically off because that requires algorithms. Life creates the algorithms, they hack into energy, they create the qualia, they're synergetic, they symbiotic, like the algorithms and the qualia evolve together and create this synergistic picture of a self and a synergistic picture of a world that's adaptive, that carries them through the world. So yes, life turns the consciousness on in an intelligent way. I think that my point about software addressed the issue with like internet. Let me know if it didn't. For the performative contradiction part, I think my first voice message here, the 3-minute 32-second one, I think that basically addresses how I feel about that. Basically, like it's the issue is, can we explain these things in principle at the fundamental level? So like when we use these high-level terms, like I believe that these high-level terms can be broken down into more reductive explanations. So it's like in philosophy, you can just say the Chinese room thought experiment. Those are 4 words. Chinese room thought experiment, 4 words. But those 4 words, they represent like a paragraph, and that paragraph represents like a simulated situation, and that simulated situation represents the laws of physics, the laws of language, like all these different things are represented as like with 4 words. These 4 high-level words, they can be explained in principle at all these lower levels. And so I'm not against using high-level language, but if our high-level language is disconnected from these lower-level explanations, then there might be a problem. And that's my issue with the strong emergence perspective, and I believe that's my issue with your interpretation of consciousness. Because as I see it, you are invoking strong emergence. And I have an issue with strong emergence. So in my next video or voice message, I'll try to clarify that. So you're also asking, like, why would I be drawn to this, like, perspective on consciousness? So I think, like, as I've alluded to already, to me, I want to be able to explain consciousness in terms of its fundamental parts. And when I look into the brain, I see lots of movement, right? Just like software. I see neurons. Neurons are made of atoms. I see sodium, and I see chlorine, these ions, like charged particles that are moving in and out of neurons through gap junctions, through little doorways, little gates. I see metabolism, like energy flowing into the neuron. So, like, I see lots of movement, and this energetic movement flowing down the neuron, down the axon, out the synapse. The synapse is pushing these neurotransmitters into this gap, and that's movement. Then these atoms are moving, and these neurotransmitters move and get moved into the next atom through the dendrites, and it's just movement from one neuron to the next. Neurotransmitters trigger ionic movement, and then ionic movement triggers neurotransmitter movement. Biochemical triggering the chemical, or triggering bioelectric triggering biochemical. It's just movement, trigger movement, trigger movement, trigger movement. And for me, that's a huge problem. It's like, where's the color? where is the qualia? Where's the pain? Where is the pleasure? So for me, like, no amount of movement justifies the existence of color. Movement can justify software. Movement can justify hurricanes. Movement can justify bricks. Movement can justify vehicles. Movement cannot justify color. Like, how many units of movement is red? How many units of movement is blue? How many to me, that doesn't even make sense. It's because it's not explainable. Like, color is not explainable in terms of movement. Like, I don't care how complex the movement is, it's still just movement. So, for me, I'm looking for a reductive explanation. How do the fundamentals afford this color? How do the fundamentals afford this sound? How do the fundamentals afford this taste? If none of the building blocks are even related to the end product, not even related in principle, then how? So it seems like there's a problem with the substrate. There's a problem with the substance. That no amount of movement is giving us the end product. So it seems like there's something else going on, and that's why I posit that there's another substance that's interacting with the movement. And I just want to be clear, I acknowledge that this is a provocative hypothesis. It posits that there are additional laws of physics that we have not uncovered yet. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think, for me, it's like everyone acknowledges there's a hard problem of consciousness. It's like, we know there's a problem here. Like, I think that the fact that the hard problem of consciousness exists, it means we got to be more open-minded. Like, we might be missing something. Like, there might be something elusive, right? Like, energy is doing something weird at a really small level. Like, it's evading detection. And so, yeah, there might be something really weird at the quantum physics level. Energy is transforming. It's doing something weird. It's doing another substance. Yeah, something like that. There's something weird going on, because I don't think movement is a sufficient explanation.
Hey, thanks for listening to all my audios, by the way. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I am, by the way. I think it's very interesting. It's nice to have an argument with somebody about these ideas who's not an idealist and who can use their brain.
So I don't have a hard definition of consciousness. I'm willing to work with other people's definitions. I'm not very rigid on the word. Like, I think people use consciousness in multiple ways. Like the Nagel approach, it's just something that's like to be something, which is a very simple and low-level definition of consciousness. Some people think of it as like meta-awareness, meta-cognition, like almost sapience. But I think that the common thread between all definitions of consciousness is they're all systems of qualia. Like, there's systems, like, would imply like a network. There's an algorithmic network of qualia that's processing sensations in an intelligent way. So yeah, systems of qualia is like the most overarching meta definition of consciousness that I would posit. In terms of color, yeah, I don't believe that there are colors out in the world, at least not in the, like, a red apple. I think it's a common misconception that the apple has redness. The apple has atoms, and those atoms bounce light. So atoms, they either absorb light or they reflect it. And so if you absorb light, then people don't see that light. And if you reflect it, people see the light. And different molecules have different, they reflect different bands of the spectrum. So the skin of the apple, it's made of molecules that reflect quote-unquote red light. But light is not red in and of itself. So the molecules of the apple are not red. They just bounce light of a certain shape. So red light quote unquote red light is just light of a certain shape. Frequencies, if you understand frequencies, it's basically it's the speed. Like if you think of the light as a wavelength, right? So a wavelength is kind of shaped like a snake. Like each frequency would be a different shape of a wavelength. So all of these lights are of different shapes or different speeds. I don't care. Like it's both just a movement paradigm. And so like light, so it's basically saying apples, they reflect light of a certain shape or a certain movement nature. And so none of that is color. The molecules are not color. The light is not color. The color is a specific experience that happens upon absorption of the light. Somewhere between our eyes and our brain, somewhere in this processing, like a pixel of color or a cluster of pixels of redness appear. And I really struggle with explaining that in terms of movement because of what I've already said. Yeah, in response to your 6-minute message, I just reject the axiom that we can't explain these emergent phenomena in terms of the fundamentals in principle. So if we understand the fundamental principles, then that can bubble up into an emergent explanation or an explanation for the emergent. That's my stance. So like you can call it weaseling if you want, but maybe it would be more productive if we focused on some examples. So you could provide, I don't know, maybe 4 examples of emergence, and we could test to see if I can generate an explanation for those phenomena from the fundamental principles. If I can't do that, then maybe you're right. But maybe it's a problem with language. Maybe we'll figure out where the problem is after we process an example. Okay, for the love thing, like technically love is an amorphous term. Like the Greeks, they've got like 9 different types of love. English just bastardized the word to mean everything. So yeah, like sure, like you can nitpick and be like, well, that's not my definition of love. I mean, we can split love into its different parts. Like you've got lust, okay, so maybe that's units of dopamine. You've got connection, like maybe that's units of oxytocin. You've got loyalty, maybe that's units of vasopressin. Like these are commonly used neurotransmitters in different psychological phenomenon, but you know, these are just atoms. It doesn't explain how does an atom equate to this like unit of feeling. That's ambiguous. That's the hard problem of consciousness. How do we go from atoms to feelings? Like if dopamine always means lust, then like there's lust everywhere. Yeah, like is like the shape of this molecule. Like if you tweak the atoms to where it's just the shape of dopamine. Now, like if you make a rock made out of dopamine molecules, it's like, that's a lustful rock. It's like, really? So like, how does dopamine turn into lust? Like we need a better explanation, right? So I would never term my paradigm of consciousness as a ghost in the machine. I'm very against the idea of spirits and whatnot. And I think that the fundamental way to distinguish my type of substance dualism from a spirit-based substance dualism is top-down control ontologies versus bottom-up control ontologies. What that means is when people think about a spirit, they imagine this ghost in the machine, and the machine has all these levers, and the ghost has all these values, and the ghost is like, well, I value this, and so I'll pull this lever and puppeteer the machine. And then the ghost is like, well, I want to make this moral decision, and then I go puppeteer the moral decision. Oh, now I'm getting tempted. So like that's a top down where it's like the ghost has this decision, and then it manipulates the machinery. I don't view it that way. I view it as bottom up, which means the brain activity is producing pixels of consciousness. So it's like you have a memory. It was like, okay, this is a memory of a dog. Yeah, your dog, maybe a dog passed away. I don't know. So like in order to generate a dog in a computer, if you want to generate a 2D image of a dog, there's data, there's pixels. Like you have to actually organize data to build that image. So when you're remembering something, like a bunch of neurons in your brain are organizing qualitative experience. It's like pixel, 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 like maybe like 1,000 neurons light up in sequence, flashing out all these pixels. And then your brain feels that pixel resonating through its network. So it's like, oh, that's the memory of the dog, right? It's not, so it's like the bottom up, the neurons are creating these experiences. It's not the spirit has the experience and dictates downwards. It's bottom up. In terms of robots, yeah, I completely disagree that robots can have conscious experience because robots are based on a movement paradigm. And movement is, you cannot logically go from movement to experience. It's like if movement plus more movement equals experience. Like that's an incorrect, invalid mathematical equation. It doesn't, you can't deduce, there's no logical paradigm where you can deduce experience from movement. So to me, it's just a dead-end analytical game. So yeah, the robots, when they're processing color, there's movement of the photon. So there's a certain shape of movement of the photon. They have sensors, and those sensors transform, so they absorb certain shapes. So it's like they have a green sensor, they got a red sensor, they got a blue sensor. So the green sensor, it absorbs green light, that is to say, photons of a certain shape, and et cetera, et cetera. So they're absorbing shapes of energy. And what do? Does the sensor convert that, does it convert that shape into an experience, or does it convert it into a 1 or a 0? And we know how software works. We know how robot works. It's converting it into electricity, and electricity is 1s and 0s. And so when it sees green, if the sensor picks up 1, and when it doesn't see green, the sensor picks up 0. And then it's aggregating all of these 1s and 0s, and it's processing an image based on 1s and 0s. That's all a movement-based paradigm. Nowhere in the system is a pixel of experience being produced. Yeah, man, I really appreciate the dialectic. I totally respect your ability to analyze these ideas, and I'm grateful to you to kind of bounce back and forth with this, because I think it helps me refine my ideas, find the weak points, find better ways to communicate, find more clarity, better distinctions. It helps you understand my perspective. It's philosophic dialectic. That's where it's at, in my opinion. So you said something to the effect of, you don't get why going from movement to conscious qualitative experience is a problem. And I feel like I've addressed this problem from multiple ways already. I'm kind of like feeling stuck. I'm like, if what I've said so far doesn't click, then I don't know what more I can say that will click. So I'm a little bit stumped on how to respond to that one. Oh, wait. Okay. So I accidentally brought up a thought experiment that is actually relevant. Subconscious processing for the win. Okay, Chinese room thought experiment. I think maybe this will help you see the problem that I see. Maybe you can address the problem that I see, which is reflected in the Chinese room thought experiment, which is kind of, it's an experiment that highlights how it's possible to have robotic intelligence without conscious experience. So I think that cuts straight to part of this divide between us. You seem leaning much more closer to robots can have consciousness, me completely against it. So yes, I will introduce that in the next voice message. Chinese room thought experiment. Basically, it's a hypothesized experiment where, like, imagine there's a room, and this room has like a little slider input, like people can slide messages, through this input in the wall, and then there's there's one guy who's inside this this room. Doesn't matter what the color is, actually. This guy is inside the room, and there's a bunch of Chinese people outside the building, and they're putting messages inside the building through this slot. This dude inside the building is processing the messages, and then he outputs a response through the same slot. So they can't see each other. All they can do is interact with each other through this input-output messaging system, very similar to software. So the crux of this thought experiment is the dude inside the room. He does not speak Chinese. He cannot read Chinese. He doesn't understand anything about Chinese. Just your average American dude. Everyone outside the room, a bunch of Chinese people, they're putting in these questions, these queries, right? Like kind of like a GPT. So these Chinese people, they write down on a piece of paper, 你好，我想了解那人工智慧是怎么处理的。 So then they write down the question, they slide it in the input, and the dude inside the room, he's like, oh crap, I don't know Chinese, but it's my job to answer these questions. What do? I pull out my handy dandy rule book. He's got this rule book that has charts and graphs and like algorithmic instructions. If this character is the first character in the sentence, then if this and that and this, if on all these conditionals, then output all of these responses. So it's like he's got like this algorithmic setup where he looks at the Chinese characters. He says, okay, I've got character A1 and I've got character B12 and I've got character C13. And when you have A1 and B12 and C13 together, you're supposed to respond with D7 and F13 and C93. And so he's outputting an algorithmic response to these questions based on a rule book, algorithmic rules. And because the rules are so well established, he is able to coherently answer these questions such that the people outside the room, they're satisfied. They're like, yes, my Chinese question was answered in Chinese. I'm so satisfied with this answer. It's like the Turing test. They assume that the person inside the room understands Chinese. And so what it's showing is that through algorithms, you can create the illusion of conscious understanding, right? You create the illusion because you're processing everything, but you're processing it without any conscious understanding. You're just following rules. So like that's the idea with software. It's just a rule following system. It follows all these rules, and the rules are so well defined, so detailed, that it outputs the illusion of understanding, the illusion of consciousness. Okay, so just listen to your first message. So I guess one way to approach this would be to just ask you to like point to where the color is in the brain. Like you think like just motion can give you color. It's like, okay, like show me like how much motion. Like is it the sodium? Like the sodium moves back and forth. There's sodium floating around the neuron. And then the sodium ions, they float into the axon and then they float back out. Is that where the color is? Or is it the chlorine? Is it the chlorine that floats into the axon and then the chlorine floats out? Is that movement the color? Or is it the neurotransmitter? Is it dopamine? Or is it oxytocin? Or it's a combination. Is it 10 dopamines? Or is it like a symphony of dopamines? Or is it why would a symphony of dopamines be red and a symphony of oxytocins be green? Like, where is the logical deduction? And I know you say translation. Like, to me, that doesn't make sense as an explanation. Like, what is a translation? It's a reconfiguration of data. What is data? It's a pattern. So in software, you would have like 0011, 0011, 0011, 0011, 0011. And we're like, holy crap, that's a lot of data. That's a large string of information. Let's translate that into a simpler piece of data. 0011. Okay, that's like a symbol that represents the whole thing. That's like an address that represents the whole thing. Okay, that's fine. But like you didn't change its nature. It's still zeros and ones. So like, you accept that you believe color is the same thing as motion. And so like in turn, you're basically saying, yeah, 0011, that could be color. Like I've just translated a long string of information into 0011, and that means that 0011 is color. But that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, can you make that make sense? Like color, it's a fundamental, they're fundamentally different in kind. It's a different category. Like color is not motion. Color is not a binary code. Color is an experience. It's just so self-evident that they're different to me. And it's back to my question. Like if motion equals experience, then every single thing is having an experience. Then the plant is feeling pain because there's motion all over the plant. So like which specific types of motion are experience, right? Which like, and it's just such it's such an arbitrary phenomenon. It's like, well, I have decided that these specific motions are specific experiences, and those specific motions are not experience. Like, what? Like, why are certain specific emotions experience and certain specific motions not experience? Like, what kind of laws of physics are we dealing with? We're dealing with like very biased, very magical laws of physics. It's like, when you have 3 dopamines, there's no experience. But when you have 200 dopamines, ta-da, we've got experience. See, that's the strong emergence. It's like, it's not here, but now it is. It's like, why? Why is it now here, right? So I guess we have to zoom in on the mechanisms, like what motion is color? What motion is sound? Like, and why is it not every motion sound? Why is not every motion color? This translation mechanism, I don't think it explains it, because you're just shuffling up the same substance. That's all translation is. You're shuffling up the same substance. And if your original substance can't explain it, then your translation can't explain it. The problem with like the robot argument for consciousness is just we know way too much about how they work. Like, the brain is still a little bit more mysterious. It's not fully understood. But software, like, we have such an in-depth, like, we built this thing. We know how it works from the ground up. So it's like, there's nothing special going on. Like, it's literally ones and zeros everywhere. And that, I mean, I don't know how to convey how problematic that is in simple terms. Like, okay, so you asked an interesting question. Where did these algorithms come from? Like the Chinese thought experiment. I mean, one answer is evolution, and the other answer is engineering, right? So for software, we engineer the algorithm. And for creatures, evolution engineers the algorithm. What does it mean to engineer an algorithm? What it means is you're constructing spatial relations, okay? So like, imagine like a shape. Okay, so like an algorithm is a shape. That's how to think of it. You're constructing a shape, and the ones and the zeros, the electrons, the flow of electricity, it flows through the shape. So imagine you like create like a circle. If you create a circle, you've created a loop, right? A loop, like in the brain, you can create a circle, right? You have neuron A connects to neuron B connects to neuron C, and neuron C connects to neuron A. You've created a chain, you've created a loop. And so it's like A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. By wiring those into the literal shape of a circle, you've created a loop that just cycles indefinitely as long as there's energy. Same thing in software. If you design the flow of the circuit into a circle, then the energy will just go into a loop. It's like loop here, back, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, right? So the algorithm is the shape, and the flow is just the ones and the zeros, the electricity, the yes electricity or the no electricity. That's the state. Okay, so all of that is, and like, okay, and the interesting thing is, like, sometimes people, like, in the topic of free will, consciousness, agency is like kind of like an important aspect of all of this. But the interesting thing about agency is like the simplest way to think about agency is it's just goal directedness. And the fascinating thing about goals is they're extremely simplistic. Like, one of the easiest things to do in software is to create a goal. And it's called a while loop. So a while loop is basically, while the goal has not been accomplished, go do the actions that lead to the goal. That's a while loop. And so it's like, first they calculate, has the goal been accomplished? Yes or no? If it's a no, then you go do this action. Then now we measure the results. Did we accomplish the goal? No. Okay, go do the action again. Keep doing it. It's like, if you're in a race, did you reach the finish line? No. Okay, keep moving forward. Okay, now did you reach the finish line? No, keep moving forward. It's like, that's a very simplistic, so easy to code. Bam, you've got a goal. It tries to win the race. That, like, amazing. And like, we would be like, oh, it must be conscious because it has goals, it has agency, it's taking actions. No, it's just, you built a circular loop, and the circular loop is, if there's electricity here, then you go then the electricity goes over here to the engine. And if it's just a circle of yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, like there's nothing special there in terms of there's no reason to say that there's anything conscious going on. And if you think that ones and zeros, if that's good enough for consciousness, then consciousness is just everywhere. Okay, I'm just going to address this first part real quick. I think we're thinking about like what reductionism means differently. Like you keep insisting that a reductionist is only allowed to talk about things at the lowest level. I think that my perspective is more aligned with there's chains of explanation, because yes, everything is complex. Things do emerge, but they weakly emerge. But what that means is there has to be a logical connection from every level to the prior level, and a logical connection from the prior level to the more fundamental level, and a logical connection from the more fundamental level to the lower level. So it's like we could talk at the level of psychology, but I have to be able to explain that in terms of neuroscience, and I have to be able to explain neuroscience in terms of biology, and I have to be able to explain biology in terms of chemistry, and I have to be able to explain chemistry in terms of physics, and I have to be able to explain physics in terms of quantum physics. So the explanations have to be logically consistent and connected all the way down. So the fact that I talk about dopamine, that's not a contradiction, as it just means that it's a shortcut to, I don't have to explain how atoms work. It's just a linguistic shortcut. There is a reductive explanation behind dopamine. Dopamine is a token that refers to all the reductivity underneath dopamine, right? A neuron is a token that refers to all the reductive explanations underneath. So any semantic word at any level of the sciences, it has an entire reductive chain of explanation, and it's a shortcut, like because it's complicated to explain. There's sodium, there's chlorine, there's Gates, there's Krebs cycle, there's electric gradients, electric fields. There's all these fatty acids. There's all these things, and we use a shortcut, neuron. But by talking about neurons, it doesn't mean we're rejecting all the fundamentals behind that. We're acknowledging that there's tons of fundamentals behind that, and we're not wasting our time with explaining all the fundamentals. We're assuming that all the fundamental chains of explanation are understood when we use the word. Sorry, I'm a little bit behind, still replying to that first 9-minute, 41-second message. You talked about robots in the second half. I don't know. I feel like we're kind of at a point where we're kind of repeating our own arguments, almost like we're getting to an impasse where we kind of have opposite intuitions. You've got this, it's almost an eliminativist position where it's as if, or a functionalist perspective, where you're viewing consciousness in terms of its functions, and there's nothing more to it. And so if a robot is able to do a function, then the function implies consciousness, and the consciousness implies function. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from you. I mean, there's lots of smart people who have that stance, but my intuitions are strongly against that stance. Like, to me, it does not make any sense to impute experience to any type of robot, any type of algorithm, GPT. As I said before, in video games and whatever, there's no such thing as color anywhere in the system. Like, you can dissect it all you want, you're never going to find color. And I think that's because there is no color in it. It's not just, there's a function of color, therefore there's color. I think that's absurd, especially because like the numeric systems for representing color in software are completely arbitrary. Every single language has their own paradigm. You can invent your own you can write your own computer language. You can make up any number for red. 001, 001. Nah, let's do 0000111, 0000111. That's red. Like, you can, in software, you define things however you want, and it's just relational. It's, well, if 0000111 occurs, then we do a function. And so it's if pattern, then function. The pattern is never read. Inside the software, the pattern is never read. The pattern is always the pattern. If 0000111, then we do this action. And then for the user, we're going to, on the monitor, we're going to, like, if it's 0001111, then we're going to activate a little piece of material that shoots out a photon, and that photon goes to their brain. Then they have color. So the human is going to interpret the pattern as red. But that redness is completely irrelevant inside the machine. The machine is never asking, if it's red, go do this function. The machine is asking, if I detect a pattern of 0001111, then I go do the function. That's how the software works. So like the concept of experience is completely irrelevant to software. It serves no function whatsoever. It's not making decisions based on functions. It's making decisions based on patterns of ones and zeros. And like additionally, the Chinese room thought experiment is like it's very possible to have functions without experience. That's what the Chinese room thought experiment shows. Your only counter argument to that was like, where did the algorithm come from? And I answered that the algorithm comes from evolution or design, right? Like, so it's not that hard to build an algorithm. You just have to get things to organize into a shape, and the environment molds the shape. So the environment puts selective pressure on a shape. Once you get a shape, you have an algorithm. Once you have an algorithm, then you do the function. That's not hard. None of that requires experience. And so that's the problem. And the other problem with robots is like you can't explain the transition, like, or this translation. There's no explanation for the translation. Like 000111, how do you translate that into red experience? You can't. You can translate 000111 into 01. You can translate it into something else. You can't translate it into experience. There's no such conversion mechanism. There's no, you can't even describe it. Like this transition, absolutely indescribable because it's illogical. There's no mathematical equation. There's no logical deduction. There's no translation function that goes from zeros and ones to color. Like it's like apples and oranges. You can't add two apples together and get an orange. That's strong emergence. That's why I have an issue with it. So yeah, you mentioned the example of Photoshop inside a machine, and I think you're saying something to the effect of you can't find it in the hardware. You can't find the Photoshop, and it's kind of like you're alluding to like this. It's like you're it sounds like you're envisioning Photoshop as like this emergent property of like this system where it's like you can't reduce Photoshop to its fundamentals in the mechanics of the system. But that's where we fundamentally disagree, because I mean, to me that's leaning towards strong emergence, right? A weak emergence perspective, you can break it down step by step, and you can break each step down into lower parts, and then break that into lower parts, and break that into lower parts. So, and the simplest way to think about Photoshop in the machine is like you download a file, right? When you download Photoshop, like you're actually downloading a file. What is a file? A file is a string of ones and zeros. So like so it's basically, you could think of it like a shape. There's a shape of ones and zeros. I don't, maybe shape is a confusing word. Like, like a piece of tape. Like there's a big long piece of tape and there's ones and zeros. Like there's something on this part of the tape and then there's nothing on the next part of the tape. Then there's something on the part of the tape and then there's nothing on the next part of the tape. And it's a patterned piece of tape. That's one way to think about it. A patterned piece of equipment. So a pattern, like the pattern is made up of little shapes, and they're organized shapes into a meta shape. So it's, you know what I mean? It's a meta shape, and that meta shape is shaped such that it has an algorithm. The arrangement of ones and zeros has an algorithm. Now that shape is only processable in the right context. So like a Windows machine can process a Windows file. So the Photoshop file processes on Windows. If you bring it to an Apple machine, or if you bring it to like an Android phone, like different equipment the shape doesn't fit into the context. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can reduce software. Like it's not impossible to reduce software. But again, I'm using a different style of reduction than you, because it seems like your interpretation of reductionism is you're only allowed to talk about the small parts, whereas mine is more like it's more like a stepwise explainability. Like the emergence level 4 is explained by emergence level 3, is explained by emergence level 2, is explained by emergence level 1, where you can break it down through all the steps logically, right? There's no gaps. And with strong emergence, there's gaps where it's like, there's the hardware level, and then there's the software level, and there's a gap in between, and we can't explain the gap between the hardware and the software. And I reject that. We can explain the gap because things are weakly emergent, not strongly emergent. Okay, I just listened to the 6-minute one, and you're saying why, like you're asking a question like why the strong weak emergence distinction is relevant. And I think in my last message, the 3-minute, 33-second one, I think I might have added clarity to that question, but just to make it extra explicit, if we accept my reductionism paradigm as equivalent to weak emergence, which is basically saying there are no explanatory gaps, right? So there is such a thing as these emergent things, but every level of emergence is explainable by the prior level, and there's no gaps between levels, right? That's the reductionism approach, is we can reduce the emergent thing to the fundamental thing by going stepwise through all the layers, and there's no gaps that stop us from going to the bottom. Okay, that's my reductionism. That's the weak emergence. So the strong emergence is there's a gap somewhere. It's the acceptance of gaps, explanatory gaps, to where it's impossible to explain the gap. That's strong emergence. And so so I think it's useful distinction, because if you accept that there are gaps, then I mean, there's multiple things. It's like, well, first of all, that opens you up to like a little bit more of like magical thinking, where it's just like, well, things just happen and that's the way it is, right? And it reduces curiosity, and it's a little bit illogical. It's kind of special pleading, because nothing in the universe requires these gaps. There's no gaps anywhere. Consciousness is the only thing that seems to require these explanatory gaps. And so why would we say consciousness has explanatory gaps? So if we reject that consciousness has explanatory gaps, then that's when we have to reduce consciousness, right? If there's no gaps, then it's reducible, right? Let's explain it by the prior layer. Keep going, explain it all the way down to the fundamentals, right? If you can't do that, then maybe it's an ignorance problem. It's like, maybe we just lack the knowledge. Maybe it is reducible, we just lack the ability to reduce it. But at least that points us in the direction of like scientific curiosity, right? It's like, we know that this should be explainable, so let's try to explain it instead of just like grant it special status, right? So yeah, I think that rejecting strong emergence puts us in a more productive philosophic stance, where we're actually motivated to figure things out. And people are gonna, like, it's complicated, so people are gonna have to come up with different theories, and we're gonna have to be a little bit charitable to be like, okay, like this, intuitively this theory sounds weird, but consciousness is weird, so maybe we need more explanatory power, so we've got to change up some assumptions, because we don't have it right now. I really like how your approach to these phenomena is very inclusive. Like you saying, like, your skepticism that psychology reduces to neuroscience, you're trying to bring in sociology, all like environment, all these things. I think that's very wise of you to like keep that kind of like a more meta bird's eye view of the landscape. That's one thing that integral perspectives are really valuable with. And so, yes, I think it's very important to keep that big picture thinking going. So, to the extent that I fail in that direction, keep calling me out on it. I love it. Now, with neuroscience, tell me how you feel about this. To the extent culture is relevant to psychology, the way culture interfaces with psychology is through the brain, and the way to interface with the brain is through the senses. So culture impacts your senses impact your brain alters, and then your psychology alters. So I guess I'm positing that maybe neuroscience is inclusive of sociological factors, like embryonic factors. Like, while you're an embryo, if you're starving, it impacts your brain development, which impacts your psychology. Well, that should manifest in neuroscience, I think. What other factors? Like personal ideas. If you invented an idea when you were 7, and that idea inspired you for like a book novel, and then it inspired you to change your career, gave you bravery, like I think that would be reflected in neuroscience. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think neuroscience is pretty meta. It's pretty inclusive, I think. So I don't know. Tell me how you feel about that. Okay, in this last minute and 30-second clip, you were basically, it sounds like you're trying to posit a physicalist weak reduction paradigm for consciousness. Very laudable, very cool project to try to do. And I also I appreciate the perspective you're coming from, because there is a lot of power to like this physicalist perspective. Like, I mean, the biggest problem I would say with like maybe my stance and the strength of your stance is that when you look at the brain, it looks extremely robotic, right? And so from my standpoint, like from software engineering, like I look at the robot and I say, there's no way this thing is conscious. But then you take that stance and you look at the brain, and you're like, oh shit, the brain is extremely robotic. So if the robot can't have consciousness, then the brain cannot have consciousness, if I'm being consistent, right? So I definitely see this problem. But like that's kind of the counter argument is like, I mean, we're human. Like every day we wake up and bam, we're hit with color. And like bam, we're hit with music. And bam, we're hit with taste. So it's like, I feel like the subjective evidence of consciousness proves that it exists. And so now we've got this conundrum. It's like, how do we reconcile the fact that it doesn't make sense for algorithms to have consciousness, but it seems like we're just algorithms, and it seems like we definitely have consciousness, right? So yeah, I can see like the approach of just saying, yeah, algorithms, it just gives you consciousness. Stop asking questions. It just does it, dude. Yeah. I mean, like, I understand the power of that stance. But yeah, I just, I still struggle with it. But your approach to like saying that there's a connection between ideas and functional, parts, and it's this interaction between the equipment and these ideas that gives the conscious experience. I mean, like maybe like I feel like maybe this could be developed like at just at the face value. It's not good enough because it's like, what is an idea? We need like an ontological description of an idea, because how does that interact with the equipment? Because we basically know what the equipment is, the materials. What are these ideas? How do they interact? We need a little bit more definitions, explanations. Yeah. But like maybe this is a valuable direction of investigation. Like maybe you're onto something here. Just need to flesh it out a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's a tricky problem. So with your software question, my understanding is that the files are stored on the hard drive, and they are stored in ones and zeros format. And my understanding is that there is like the hard drives are made of like a special type of magnetic material that is easily imprintable. And so you can like imprint, like you can indent it, or you can kind of mark it with electrons and stuff like that, to where you can change its charge a little bit. So like you can make a landscape on the hard drive where it's like this piece of the metal has been affected, whether by charge or indentation, like, and then you can reverse it. And that's when you rewrite or you delete the file. So basically this magnetic strip is very, it can change its stance. It can change its state. Its material state can be altered. So you zap a laser on a piece of the magnetic strip and it alters its state. And so that's a 1 or a 0. So it's like, has it been altered? 0. I mean, has it been altered? That's 1. If it hasn't been altered, that's a 0. And you just have the laser go, and it just like Morse code instantiates all these 1s and 0s into the strip. That's my understanding of how it records files. So the hard drive has the file. So Photoshop would be a file on the hard drive. And then on the icon on your desktop, so you like move your mouse, you click on Photoshop, the icon on your desktop is like an address to the hard drive. So it's like, okay, which part of the hard drive do we look at? Well, we're supposed to look at, quadrant A, row 17, character 10. So the desktop icon points you to where on the hard drive to look. And then the mechanics of the machine goes to that part and starts to read it. So there's a sensor that says, "Is what type of state are we? At this point in the hard drive, what's the state? Is it a 1 or a 0?" And it goes through and it grabs all the 1s and 0s and it loads it into the RAM. So hard drive goes to the RAM. The RAM is the random access memory. It's a more dynamic. The hard drive is more static, as in it just stays the same more often. The random access memory means it's a more volatile medium. So the materials are more volatile. So you load up all the 1s and 0s into the RAM, and then the RAM can there can be multiple algorithms inside your RAM simultaneously. So then when it reads in the 1s and 0s, there's instructions at the beginning of the file. It tells you what you're supposed to do with the rest of the file. And so it starts to say, okay, we grab this part of the file. Let's go into the file. Let's dig into the 600th line. Let's grab a piece. And we're going to within the RAM, we're going to build an object. I mean, maybe if we're talking about like a video game, it's like, okay, at location 600, there's instructions for how to build like a human in Call of Duty. And then at row 700, there's how to build the gun. And at row 800, there's instructions for how to build. So it's algorithmically flowing through this document, grabbing all the pieces, building it up together, building all these shapes from a meta shape. And it goes through these loops in the algorithm, and the game loop, it gives you iterative processes. I'm wondering if I missed part of. Did I explain this fully enough, or what did I miss? FYI, as a software engineer, I was trained more in coding. So like hardware is not my specialty. So I don't want to give the false impression that I'm an expert at hardware. I've mostly had to Google how this stuff works to learn it on my own, because I was not trained in any of this. So basically, interpret me as an amateur, not an expert. Yeah, man. In this 8-minute, 37-second clip, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I agree that love is complex, and it probably reduces to lots of sub feelings. Like I think that's really accurate how you're saying. Yeah, like loneliness could be like a component of it. Like it could be like this collage of like feelings. But I think that if you're going to be fully reductive, which is to take the reduction project seriously, you have to say, okay, let's keep going, right? Where does the loneliness come from, right? And so like we've got to be able to explain loneliness at a further level downwards, right? And like when you go from love to loneliness, you're still in the layer of psychology. So we haven't even got to the layer of neuroscience left. And so that's probably going to be the hard part, right? Because love and loneliness are amorphous. You can't use math to describe them. You can't use motion to describe them. And if you go down a layer, it's just motion and math. So it's like, wait, how does that lower layer explain the higher layer? That's the problem I'm getting at. That's the hard problem. And so I guess getting a satisfying explanation is kind of the tricky question if we're going to be a weak emergentist. One thing that you mentioned earlier, I forget which message, you're talking about the arbitrariness of red and making an analogy to the arbitrariness of language, I believe. Like computer code red is arbitrary, and our linguistic description of red is arbitrary. Like in Chinese, it would be 红色, that's red. So I think that the problem with that approach is that language is pointing. So language would be like this intersubjective phenomenon that points to something objective. That's the ostensibility of language. When you reduce language to its fundamentals, it's got to point to something real. It's got to point to like patterns, or it's got to point to objects. And so with redness, when English speakers say red, that word is pointing to the sensation of redness. When Chinese people say 红色, that's pointing to the sensation of redness. So we're pointing to the same thing despite arbitrary classifiers. In the software, it's not pointing to anything. It's just a pattern. And that pattern is translated into a photon at the very end of the process. So software, it would be analogous to them saying, like, if beep, then do this. If beep beep, then do this. If beep, then do this. And then at the very end, it outputs a photon, and you look at it, you're like, ah, that's red, right? Like redness was never a part of the process. I'm not sure I fully understood your message in the 2-minute, 16-second audio clip, but this is my best attempt to summarize what you said. I think what you're trying to say is, as long as you interpret neuroscience in this, in its proper context, you're interpreting neuroscience in light of the relevance of sociology, in light of the relevance of all of these different factors. As long as neuroscience is situated in relation to all the relevant factors, then it's okay to reduce psychology to neuroscience. I think that sounds pretty reasonable to me, if that's what you were implying. So actually, my understanding is that all software actually does reduce to ones and zeros. So yeah, like it sounds like what you're alluding to is like the like coding languages are written. Their coding languages are designed such that we can basically understand them. Right? These are high-level programming languages, like Python, Java, C++. Like it's written in human language, so it's like if x is greater than 10, then print hello world, and else do nothing. You know what I mean? So it's like we can kind of understand the language at this high level, but there's a process called compilation. And so every single programming language, the computer cannot use it, right? The computer doesn't understand English. The compilation process translates the English into zeros and ones. So that's what every single piece of software has to be compiled. And then once it's compiled into like a file, like an exe file or whatever. And that's a file, that's basically a string of ones and zeros. So the translation mechanism translates between English and machine language. That's what compilation does. So yeah, so Photoshop, it would be written in a English programming language, but that would be translated into ones and zeros. And then when it's operating, it would be the ones and zeros operating. So yeah, it's hard, it's pretty crazy, but yeah, like it kind of it shows the power of emergent or weak emergence and the reductibility. Like the word if reduces to some, it reduces to ones and zeros. The word then reduces to ones and zeros. Like all of these, concepts, ideas, words, language, it all reduces to the fundamentals. So like that's why in software, this concept of reduction is so powerful that it's like, damn, everything is just ones and zeros. And it's like, what does that mean? So like, how do you get consciousness? You know what I mean? So dude, like talking about color is my favorite thing to do because it's so fucking nuts. It's so fucking nuts. So like in our eyes, our eyes, we have like cones, right? We've got receptors for the photons. And we've got 4 types of cones. We've got a cone that absorbs red light, red wavelength light, not red wavelength light, and another one that absorbs green wavelength light, and one that absorbs blue wavelength light. And then we've got one that just absorbs luminosity, brightness in general. So that's our night vision, like a grayscale luminosity detection. So we've got 3 color receptors, but the crazy thing about color is we combine our color reception. So like if like a yellow school bus is driving down the road, where the fuck does yellow come from? Yellow is completely made up by our brain because the school bus, it's giving off red light and it's giving off green light and it's not giving off blue light. That's like ontologically in the real world. That's what's going on. The school bus gives red light and green light, but not blue light. Our eyes absorb the school bus red light and it absorbs the school bus green light and it does not absorb the blue light. And then we take the combination of red and green and we fucking invent yellow out of nowhere. Like, what the fuck? So like when, like I have a little bit of issue with saying, oh yeah, we're just getting the colors from the objective reality. Like, I don't think yellow comes from the objective reality. Like, yellow is just invented, completely just manufactured out of nowhere. Yeah, man, I see that you're definitely trying to stick to a weak emergentist paradigm, and so that's pretty logical to me. I guess just for me, this the problem is just going to be how do you actually logically go from step to step, from layer to layer. Like I still have struggles with how to do that without an additional substance. So yeah, I guess maybe one day maybe there'll be more discoveries and someone will have a really good explanation for how you can go from step to step. And maybe I'll get persuaded that, we don't need another substance. But it just kind of mind boggles me that that such that just the idea of going from movement to experience just seems like a difference in category that doesn't make logical sense to me at the moment, but maybe one day it will. Yeah, man, I don't know. Software is pretty complex. It seems like it does just all reduce, but it does produce all of these interesting objects, which is fascinating. Like, I mean, object oriented programming, that's kind of the idea is that, but all of these objects are reducible to ones and zeros, but it's just fascinating how so much structure can emerge out of this reductive substrate. Um, but in terms of other analogies, yeah, I'm not sure. But in terms of neuroscience, the thing like I've poked around at YouTube for like introductory lectures on neuroscience, multiple different lecturers teaching, introductory principles and stuff. Like the thing that shocked me was how similar it was to software. I mean, obviously not exactly similar, but it's similar enough to where it's like if a neuron fires, you could interpret a neuron firing as a 1, and you could interpret the absence of a neuron firing as a 0. And there's like different thresholds. So it's like if the electricity is at 120, then it's going to activate the firing of the neuron. But if the electricity is lower than 120, then it's not going to fire. And so that's kind of like an if statement. Like if it's 120 or greater, then output a 1. And if it's less than 120, then output a 0. You know what I mean? That feels that's very software intuitive logic. I mean, but my understanding is all these AI algorithms, they were inspired by neuroscience. Like the people in tech, they're like, hey, we want to make smarter software. And we've like in the 90s, they were getting hopeful about AI and they failed. They're like, maybe we need to learn from brains. Like brains are smart. Maybe if we can figure out what brains are doing, we can make our software better and we can make more money. So they got really interested in neuroscience, and they call them in software, the modern AI stuff, they call it neural networks. So they're basically trying their best to mimic what the brain is doing. And they succeeded in making the software way more intelligent. You know what I mean? GPT, it's based on this new paradigm of neural networks. So I don't know, it's fascinating stuff.